What becomes clear at this stage of our exploration is that the divine field is not something we access by force, it is something we enter through coherence. When I speak of coherence, I'm referring to the alignment between what we think, what we feel, and what our bodies are expressing at the cellular level. The divine field responds not to words, but to states of being. And this is where belief becomes far more than a mental preference. Belief becomes biology. Every thought we think carries an electrical charge. Every emotion we feel carries a magnetic signature. Together, they form a waveform that interfaces with the field around us. Modern physics has already shown that what we call empty space is not empty at all. It is a sea of energy, structured and responsive. Ancient traditions describe this same reality as the subtle fabric of creation, the invisible matrix that connects all life. When our internal world is fragmented, the signal we broadcast is fragmented, but when our heart and mind move in harmony, something extraordinary happens. The body shifts into a state of regulation. Stress hormones decrease, the immune system strengthens, neural pathways reorganize, and in that physiological harmony, we become more receptive to possibilities that previously felt unreachable. I've come to understand that the divine field is less about getting what we want and more about becoming the version of ourselves who naturally aligns with what we seek. This is a profound shift. Instead of asking, how do I manifest this? We begin to ask, who must I become to resonate with this reality? Ancient wisdom traditions taught that feeling is the language of prayer. Modern neuroscience confirms that emotional states directly influence genetic expression. When we sustain elevated emotions, gratitude, compassion, love, we create measurable changes in heart rhythm patterns. The heart's electromagnetic field expands and becomes more ordered. That ordered field doesn't stop at the skin, it extends outward, interacting with the environment. In that state, we are not separate observers of life. We are participants in a feedback loop. Consider what happens when fear dominates our inner landscape. The body constricts, breathing becomes shallow, the brain prioritizes survival pathways. In that state, our perception narrows, we literally see fewer options, possibility shrinks. Now contrast that with a state of calm certainty. The nervous system relaxes, the prefrontal cortex becomes more active, creativity increases. We perceive opportunities that were invisible moments before. The divine field has not changed. We have. This is why belief must move beyond intellectual agreement. A belief held only in the mind is weak. A belief embodied through emotion and physiology becomes a coherent instruction to the field. And the field responds not with magic, but with alignment. I often reflect on how ancient temples were built at sites believed to hold special energetic properties. Pilgrims would travel great distances to enter those spaces, yet what they were truly seeking was not geography, it was state. The sacredness they felt in those places was activated by the coherence within themselves. Today, science is beginning to measure subtle interactions that mystics spoke of centuries ago. The body communicates through biophotons, tiny emissions of light. The brain operates through electrical oscillations. The heart produces the largest measurable electromagnetic field in the body. We are luminous beings participating in a luminous universe. And here is where the divine field becomes practical. If anything is possible within this field, why do so many people feel stuck? The answer lies in emotional memory. The body remembers past experiences, especially traumatic ones. When those memories remain unresolved, they become filters through which we interpret the present. We may consciously desire abundance, love, or healing, but unconsciously we continue broadcasting fear, doubt, or unworthiness. The field reflects coherence. It does not override contradiction. So the work becomes internal integration. When we bring awareness to stored emotions, when we allow ourselves to feel without suppression or denial, something remarkable happens. The charge begins to dissolve. The body recalibrates. Our baseline state shifts. And as it shifts, the external world reorganizes in subtle ways. I have seen this repeatedly. A person changes their internal narrative and relationships transform. Someone heals a long-held resentment and unexpected opportunities arise. These are not random coincidences. They are examples of resonance. Resonance is the principle that, like frequencies, amplify one another. When we hold a clear, emotionally charged vision of a desired outcome, and when that vision is consistent with our inner state, the divine field begins to reflect pathways toward it. Not always instantly, not always dramatically, but reliably. The key is consistency. The nervous system learns through repetition. The field responds to sustained coherence. A single moment of gratitude cannot override years of fear, but daily practice can. When we repeatedly enter a state of appreciation before evidence appears, we teach the body that the desired future is safe. Over time, that emotional rehearsal becomes more natural than doubt. This is where the mind-body connection becomes transformative. Our bodies are not obstacles to spiritual experience. They are instruments of it. Every heartbeat, every breath, every neural impulse contributes to the signal we emit. The divine field does not judge that signal, it simply mirrors it. And so I ask myself, and I invite you to ask as well, what am I broadcasting right now? Is my internal dialogue aligned with the life I say I want? Are my emotions reinforcing limitation, or are they cultivating possibility? This inquiry is not about self-criticism. It is about awareness. Awareness creates choice. Choice creates new patterns. And new patterns reshape both biology and experience. Ancient teachings often spoke of the kingdom within. Modern science reveals that our internal environment profoundly shapes our external outcomes. The bridge between these perspectives is coherence. When thought, emotion, and action align, we become powerful contributors to reality. The divine field is not distant, it is intimate. It pulses through every atom of our bodies. It responds to authenticity, not performance. We cannot trick it with surface affirmations while harboring deep doubt. But when we courageously align our inner world with our highest vision, we begin to experience subtle shifts. Synchronicities increase. Insights arise at just the right moment. Conversations open unexpected doors. It feels as though life is collaborating with us rather than resisting us. And perhaps it always has been. What changes is our participation. When we understand that we are both observers and influencers within this vast field of energy, responsibility replaces helplessness. We recognize that our inner coherence is not a private affair, it is a contribution to the collective field of humanity. Because the same divine field that responds to individual intention also connects every living being, which means that the state we cultivate within ourselves quietly shapes the world around us in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. And as we continue exploring how sustained emotional alignment reorganizes not only personal circumstances but also collective realities, we begin to see that the true power of the divine field may not lie in isolated manifestations at all, but in the awakening of a humanity that finally understands that consciousness itself is the creative medium. When we begin to grasp this, even intellectually, something inside us softens. The old model of a powerless human navigating a chaotic universe starts to dissolve. In its place emerges a new understanding. We are participants in a responsive cosmos, constantly shaping and being shaped by the field in which we exist. But participation requires responsibility. If consciousness is creative, then every reaction, every judgment, every unconscious emotional pattern is also creative, not in a mystical sense, but in a measurable, biological, and energetic way. The nervous system fires, hormones release, neural circuits strengthen through repetition. What we rehearse internally becomes our baseline state. And our baseline state is the lens through which the divine field reflects possibilities back to us. I've noticed that when people first encounter this idea, they feel inspired and then intimidated, because it suggests that we can no longer blame circumstances entirely. We have to examine the subtle patterns we've been carrying for years, sometimes decades. Yet this is not about blame, it is about empowerment. The divine field does not punish inconsistency, it simply mirrors it. If we send mixed signals desiring love while expecting betrayal, longing for success while anticipating failure, the reflection we receive will be equally mixed. The field amplifies clarity, not confusion. This is why emotional honesty is so important. We cannot bypass grief, anger, or fear and expect to enter coherence. Suppressed emotion fragments our signal. The body remains in subtle defense. The heart rhythm becomes erratic. The brain shifts into vigilance. In that state, the possibilities available to us shrink. But when we allow ourselves to process emotion fully without identifying with it, we begin to free energy that was locked in the past. The body moves from survival to creation. And creation is the natural language of the divine field. Modern research into neuroplasticity reveals that the brain is not fixed. It reorganizes based on experience and repetition. When we deliberately cultivate states of gratitude or compassion, new neural networks form. The more we practice, the more automatic these states become. Eventually, coherence becomes less of an effort and more of a trait. This is where ancient contemplative practices intersect beautifully with science. Breath regulation influences heart rhythm. Heart rhythm influences brain waves. Brain waves influence perception. Perception influences choice. And choice determines the trajectory of our lives. Everything is connected. When we slow our breathing and intentionally evoke appreciation, the heart's electromagnetic pattern becomes smoother and more rhythmic. That rhythm sends signals to the brain that promote clarity and emotional stability. In that state, our capacity to imagine new possibilities expands. Imagination is not fantasy, it is rehearsal. When we vividly imagine a future outcome and pair it with genuine emotion, the brain begins to encode that scenario as a lived experience. The body responds as though the event is already unfolding. Hormonal cascades shift, muscle tension changes, even posture subtly adjusts. We begin embodying the future before it physically arrives. And this embodiment is what the divine field recognizes. And not the words, not the wish, the state. I often think about how children approach life. Their imagination is effortless. Their belief is fluid. They move quickly from idea to feeling to action. There is very little internal contradiction. As adults, we accumulate doubt. We accumulate stories about what is possible and what is not. Those stories solidify into beliefs, and those beliefs shape our biology. So the journey back into the divine field is in many ways a return to internal alignment. It does not mean ignoring reality. It means recognizing that reality is more flexible than we were taught. Consider how rapidly collective beliefs can shift. A technological breakthrough once deemed impossible becomes commonplace within a decade. A social norm transforms across a generation. These changes begin as ideas held by a small group of individuals who sustain belief despite skepticism. Over time, coherence spreads. The divine field is not limited to individual intention. It operates collectively. When groups of people synchronize emotion and focus, measurable changes occur in social environments. Crime rates shift, cooperation increases, collective mood alters. These phenomena suggest that consciousness is not confined to the skull, it is relational, it is interactive, which means that every time we enter coherence, we contribute stability to the larger field. This reframes personal practice as service. When I regulate my nervous system, I am not only benefiting myself, I am reducing the likelihood that I will transmit stress into my relationships. When I choose compassion over reaction, I am subtly altering the emotional tone of my environment. These micro shifts accumulate, and accumulation is powerful. The divine field responds to sustained patterns. A single coherent moment plants a seed. Repeated coherent moments cultivate a garden. Eventually that garden becomes the atmosphere in which we live. Yet there is still mystery here. We cannot predict exactly how or when outcomes will unfold. The field is vast, interwoven with countless variables. Our role is not to control the mechanics, but to refine the signal, and refining the signal requires awareness of language. The words we use internally matter. Not because the universe is listening to vocabulary, but because language shapes perception. If we constantly describe ourselves as unlucky, unworthy, or incapable, the body responds accordingly. Tension increases, opportunity goes unnoticed, behavior reinforces the identity. But when we consciously shift language to reflect possibility, the nervous system interprets safety, curiosity replaces fear, exploration replaces withdrawal, new behaviors emerge. This is not positive thinking, it is conscious calibration. The divine field meets us at the frequency we consistently inhabit. If we want new experiences, we must become familiar with new internal states. That familiarity takes practice, it takes patience. It takes willingness to sit in discomfort as old patterns dissolve. Because as we dismantle limiting beliefs, there is often a period of uncertainty. The old identity fades, the new one has not fully stabilized. In that space, we may feel disoriented. But this is not regression, it is reorganization. And reorganization is the birthplace of possibility. If anything truly becomes possible within the divine field, it is because we have learned to sustain coherence long enough for reality to reorganize around us, not through force, not through denial, but through consistent alignment between thought, emotion, and embodied action. The deeper question then becomes, what would our lives look like if coherence were our default state rather than our occasional practice? How would our relationships shift if we approach them from emotional wholeness instead of projection? How would our health transform if we treated the body as a partner in consciousness rather than a separate machine? How would our collective future unfold if enough of us understood that the field connecting us is responsive, intelligent, and intimately shaped by the states we cultivate within ourselves? And as we continue exploring the implications of this living field, how it responds not only to individual healing but to collective awakening, we begin to sense that the next frontier is not technological at all, but deeply human, emerging from our capacity to consciously embody coherence at every level of our being. When I think about this, I realize that most of our daily interactions are unconscious exchanges of energy. We rarely consider that every conversation, every gesture, every fleeting thought carries a signature that reaches beyond the immediate moment. Yet the divine field perceives it all not as judgment but as information. The field is responsive to the quality of attention, the rhythm of emotion, and the alignment of thought and intention. Each of these components acts like a tuning fork, shaping resonance across both personal and collective spheres. For example, consider moments of deep human connection. When two people are fully present with one another, the heart rhythms of each can synchronize. Neural activity mirrors empathy. Micro-expressions convey authenticity. In these moments, we tap into the same principle that governs larger-scale interactions with the divine field. Coherence between internal states creates a ripple effect that extends far beyond our immediate perception. And in that ripple, possibilities that seemed impossible can arise spontaneously. The key, as I've observed, is not merely focusing on outcomes, but cultivating the internal conditions that allow the outcomes to emerge naturally. This is subtle, but profoundly different from conventional goal setting. Goals without internal alignment are often pursued through tension and force. Coherent goals, by contrast, are pursued with a sense of flow, where energy moves efficiently and intuition guides action. The field responds to this efficiency. It does not favor effort over alignment, it favors resonance. Emotion is the amplifier. Thought alone is a weak signal. When we engage the body with sustained, elevated emotions, joy, love, appreciation, we generate a signal that the field recognizes as coherent and whole. These emotions are not superficial, they are deeply embodied states that the nervous system encodes and broadcasts outward. And here is the most compelling aspect. The more we practice these states, the more our biology adapts. Cells communicate differently, gene expression shifts, even heart rate variability improves, signaling resilience and adaptability. This is not mysticism, it is measurable physiology interfacing with subtle energy. Yet the divine field is not a vending machine. It does not respond to demands or forced visualization. It is responsive to alignment, and alignment requires honesty. We must confront the inner contradictions, the unresolved emotions, the self-limiting narratives we carry. Only then can we recalibrate. Only then can we emit a coherent signal that is recognizable to the field. I have found that one of the most potent tools in this recalibration process is introspective awareness, pausing to notice the rhythm of breath, the tone of emotion, the subtle feedback from the body allows us to correct course in real time. When tension arises, we breathe into it. When judgment surfaces, we observe it without identification. Over time, these micro-adjustments compound, creating a baseline state of coherence that feels increasingly natural. And with that baseline, interaction with the divine field becomes intuitive rather than forced. Solutions appear in ways that cannot be logically anticipated. Opportunities align themselves in unexpected patterns. Insights emerge as if from a source beyond conscious thought. It is in this interplay between the known and the unknown, the intentional and the emergent, that the field manifests its potential. This leads to a fundamental principle I have come to trust deeply. What we sustain within becomes the scaffolding for what appears without. The field reflects the interior landscape before it manifests physically. Therefore, cultivating a coherent inner environment is not optional. It is foundational. Emotional states, habitual thought patterns, and physiological rhythms collectively form the template through which the field operates. When we are fragmented internally, the external world mirrors that fragmentation. When we are coherent, the field mirrors possibility, opportunity, and alignment. We can see evidence of this principle in both subtle and dramatic ways. Small shifts in personal behavior, choosing gratitude over frustration, curiosity over judgment, lead to incremental changes in relationships, health, and performance. Larger sustained coherence can precipitate seemingly extraordinary outcomes, breakthroughs in creativity, spontaneous problem solving, even profound synchronicities. Yet all of these arise from internal states, not external striving. Ancient wisdom recognized this long before modern science could measure it. Practices like meditation, prayer, chanting, and ritual were designed to synchronize thought, emotion, and physiology, creating resonance with the underlying field of creation. While the language was symbolic, the effect was concrete. Practitioners altered their internal state to become coherent with the possibilities they sought. Modern research now confirms that these practices are not merely cultural artifacts, they are mechanisms for engaging the field through embodied coherence. I often reflect on how this changes our understanding of human potential. The common assumption is that progress is linear, driven primarily by effort and external action. Yet the divine field suggests a complementary truth. Progress is nonlinear, emergent, and responsive to the quality of our internal state. Action alone is insufficient. Strategy alone cannot unlock the field. It is the integration of awareness, emotion, and physiology sustained over time that shapes reality in ways that conventional approaches cannot predict. And here is another subtlety that I find endlessly fascinating. The field is impartial. It does not favor one person over another. It is not influenced by status, wealth, or intellect. What it responds to is coherence. This democratization of possibility has profound implications. It means that anyone, regardless of circumstance, can access the field once they cultivate alignment. It also means that the limitations we perceive are rarely imposed from outside. They are self-generated through internal fragmentation. The implications extend even further. If collective coherence amplifies possibilities, then our individual work contributes to a larger human ecosystem. When enough people cultivate internal alignment, the field itself becomes more ordered at a global scale. Social systems stabilize, cooperation increases, conflict diminishes, possibility expands collectively. In this sense, personal practice becomes both self-serving and altruistic. By becoming coherent, we not only access our own potential, but we also participate in elevating the field in which all life exists. Yet the path is subtle. It is not about grand gestures or external achievements. It is about returning again and again to presence, noticing tension and releasing it, choosing emotion over reaction, synchronizing thought and feeling, embodying vision rather than chasing it. The field responds not to volume or force, but to subtlety and consistency. And consistency is where discipline meets devotion. It is the repeated return to coherence, even when the old patterns urge distraction or doubt. It is the willingness to feel, to adjust, to embody possibility before it becomes visible. The field does not rush, it does not coerce. It responds when we cultivate alignment that is sustained, authentic, and unbroken over time. I have observed that people often underestimate this principle. They expect rapid results, or they judge progress by external markers. Yet the field operates according to a logic of resonance, not linear time. Moments of insight or opportunity may appear sudden, but they are always preceded by a period of internal alignment that may have gone unnoticed. The visible manifestation is simply the tip of an iceberg built from sustained coherence beneath the surface. This is why patience is integral. Patience is not passive waiting, it is active alignment. It is a daily practice of tuning internal instruments so that they resonate with the possibilities we intend to bring forth. And in the waiting, the body, mind, and field harmonize in ways that lay the foundation for outcomes beyond imagination. Which brings me to the most intriguing aspect of the divine field. Uncertainty is not a barrier. It is the canvas on which possibility is painted. When we embrace uncertainty with coherent alignment, we do not cling to outcomes. Instead, we allow the field to respond creatively, providing solutions, pathways, and synchronicities that we could never have engineered through logic alone. And as we lean into this interplay between certainty and openness, between intention and surrender, we begin to sense that the divine field is less about external results and more about the expansion of our own consciousness. Possibility becomes less a goal and more a lived experience. We realize that the universe does not withhold, it mirrors the coherence we carry. It does not resist, it reflects the clarity we embody. And in this reflection, the boundary between internal and external begins to dissolve, revealing a reality in which anything is truly possible once we have cultivated the internal conditions to recognize and participate in it. At this stage, it becomes evident that possibility is not a matter of luck or external circumstance, it is a matter of alignment. And alignment is neither abstract nor fleeting. It is the repeated harmonization of thought, emotion, and physiology which creates a coherent signal that the divine field can respond to. This signal is both subtle and powerful, and it operates through resonance rather than force. I often reflect on how easily we underestimate the power of subtlety. We think that transformation requires dramatic action or heroic effort. Yet the field does not respond to volume, it responds to clarity. A steady, coherent heartbeat, a calm, focused mind, and an emotionally regulated body generate far more influence than frantic striving or scattered intention. The amplification comes from consistency, not intensity. Consider the role of imagination in this process. Imagination is often dismissed as escapism, but in the context of coherence, it becomes a rehearsal for reality. When we vividly envision a desired outcome while embodying the emotions of its fulfillment, our nervous system interprets that state as real. Neural pathways strengthen, hormonal systems adjust, heart rhythms synchronize with emotion, and the field begins to respond not to our wish but to the coherent state we inhabit. Here is a critical distinction. The field does not respond to superficial desire. It responds to embodied belief. That means we must bridge the gap between conscious intention and subconscious conditioning. We must identify and release the limiting narratives that have silently shaped our experience. Until that occurs, any intention we hold will encounter resistance because the internal signal remains fragmented. The process of integration often requires confronting discomfort. Old patterns do not dissolve easily. Memories, fears, and deeply held assumptions surface, challenging the coherence we are cultivating. But these challenges are not obstacles, they are opportunities. They are the raw material from which alignment is forged. By acknowledging what is without judgment and allowing the body and mind to recalibrate, we create a foundation for sustained coherence that the field can recognize. Emotion, once again, is central. The body is not a passive vessel, it is an active participant in consciousness. Elevated emotions, gratitude, love, appreciation, create measurable changes in the heart's electromagnetic field. The prefrontal cortex becomes more active, neural circuits shift, even gene expression can be influenced. These changes are not just physiological, they are signals that the field can respond to. In other words, when we inhabit coherent emotion, we are creating an energetic signature that shapes possibility. Yet coherence is not static. It is dynamic and responsive like a living instrument. The field is not a rigid machine, it is an interactive, responsive environment. When we hold a coherent internal state, the field reflects possibilities that match that state. If our coherence wavers, the reflection becomes muddled. This is why sustained practice is essential. Coherence is a skill developed through repeated alignment between thought, emotion, and physiology. I have noticed that many people approach this concept with a duality. They think they must either control the field or surrender entirely. Neither is accurate. The field is neither a tool to manipulate nor a passive backdrop. It is responsive. Our role is to maintain coherence, not to micromanage outcomes. Action is important, but it emerges naturally from alignment. When our internal state is coherent, inspired action flows effortlessly, guided by intuition and informed by clarity. There is also a collective dimension that cannot be ignored. We exist within a field that connects all consciousness. Individual coherence contributes to a larger resonance. When enough people inhabit elevated coherent states, the collective field begins to stabilize. Social dynamics shift. Cooperation increases, conflict diminishes, innovation accelerates, possibility expands on a scale far beyond the individual. Our personal practice then becomes both self-empowering and contributory to the collective. This principle reframes responsibility. It is no longer a matter of wishing for change and hoping external conditions will improve. It is a matter of cultivating coherence and contributing to the energetic environment in which we live. Each thought, each emotion, each physiological state becomes a meaningful participant in the ongoing creation of reality. The field does not judge, it mirrors, and what it mirrors is the pattern we sustain. Ancient traditions understood this intuitively. Practices such as meditation, prayer, chanting, and ritual were designed to harmonize the body, mind, and emotion, generating coherence that could interact with the larger field. Modern science is only now beginning to measure these phenomena. Heart rate variability, neural synchronization, biophotonic emission, but the principle is timeless. Coherence amplifies possibility. I have often wondered how this principle could transform daily life. Imagine approaching challenges not from fear, anxiety, or compulsion, but from a grounded, coherent state. Decisions emerge with clarity. Opportunities are recognized that would otherwise be invisible. Relationships deepen because communication is guided by presence rather than reaction. Health improves because the body is not operating in chronic stress. And in every domain, the field begins to reflect alignment. The paradox is that coherence does not require effort in the conventional sense. It requires attention, yes, and presence, yes, but not struggle. The energy of resistance is the opposite of alignment. When we relax into coherence, we create space for the field to respond naturally. This is the essence of non-forcing manifestation. We become the state that naturally attracts the outcomes that match it. I have witnessed this principle repeatedly. Individuals who cultivate consistent emotional coherence experience transformations that seem improbable. Healing occurs, opportunities arise, and relationships shift in ways that defy conventional expectation. The common thread is always the internal state, the sustained alignment of thought, emotion, and physiology. External circumstances are secondary. The field responds to the pattern, not the narrative. This leads to an essential insight. The divine field is not external. It is not a separate place to be accessed. It is the interface between our internal coherence and the responsive intelligence of reality. By cultivating clarity, emotional stability, and embodied presence, we enter the field naturally. We do not control it. We participate in it. We do not demand outcomes. We sustain alignment that allows outcomes to emerge. And here is the subtlety that often surprises people. The field does not respond to a single burst of intention. It responds to patterns sustained over time. One moment of gratitude cannot outweigh years of unconscious fear. One visualization cannot overcome decades of fragmented belief. Coherence must be habitual, reinforced daily through attention, emotional regulation, and embodied practice. The longer and more consistently we inhabit alignment, the stronger the signal we broadcast. This is where the profound patience of the field becomes apparent. It is not hurried, it is responsive, not reactive. It amplifies coherence, but it does not force it. And this teaches a deep lesson. Possibility is not instant gratification. It is an emergent property of sustained alignment. We cannot rush it, but we can prepare for it. We can create the conditions for its natural unfolding. And as we prepare for it, we notice subtle signs of response, a chance encounter that shifts perspective, an idea that arrives at precisely the right moment, a physical sensation that signals readiness. These are not coincidences. They are reflections of coherence interacting with the responsive intelligence of the field. And they remind us that the divine field is not something out there. It is woven through every thought, every emotion, every cell of our being. Which brings me to the final reflection I can share in this segment. The true power of the divine field lies not in isolated achievements, but in the ongoing cultivation of consciousness itself. By sustaining alignment, we awaken capacity within ourselves to participate consciously in reality. We discover that the field is not a mystery to solve, but a medium to inhabit. And the possibilities that emerge are only limited by the coherence we are willing to maintain. In our daily experience, what becomes evident as we sustain coherence is that the boundaries we once believed were fixed between self and other, mind and body, internal and external reality begin to blur. The divine field operates in a dimension where these distinctions are functional rather than absolute. When we cultivate internal alignment, we experience a subtle expansion of perception. Time feels less linear. Possibilities appear simultaneous rather than sequential. Patterns emerge that were previously invisible, and we begin to sense the interconnectivity of all phenomena. At first, this expanded perception can be disorienting. We are accustomed to living in a world defined by separation, cause and effect, and linear progression. Yet coherence in the field reveals that influence is multidirectional, that outcomes are co-created with forces that cannot be fully controlled or predicted. The paradox is liberating. We are both immensely influential and yet not burdened with the illusion of control. The field responds to what we sustain, not to what we demand. I have observed that those who practice this consistently experience a shift in intuition. It is no longer a vague hunch, but a heightened sensitivity to patterns and possibilities. Decisions that once required prolonged deliberation now emerge with clarity. Opportunities present themselves without force. Relationships flow more naturally. Even moments of conflict can be navigated with composure, because internal coherence creates a kind of stabilizing influence on both perception and action. This is why emotion remains the cornerstone of interaction with the field. The body does not lie. Emotions carry information about our internal alignment, and they modulate our physiological signal to the field. Elevated emotions, compassion, gratitude, joy, create a coherent waveform that the field can recognize and respond to. Negative emotions, fear, resentment, doubt, fragment the signal, creating interference that limits access to possibility. It is not about suppression or denial. It is about conscious engagement, noticing emotion, understanding its origin, and integrating it without identification. Integration is key because the field mirrors not only conscious thought, but also unconscious patterns. If we attempt to engage with the field while ignoring internal contradictions, the reflection we receive will always contain friction. The signal must be coherent at all levels, mind, heart, and body, for the field to reflect aligned outcomes. This is why practices that combine awareness, breath regulation, and emotional attunement are so powerful. They create an internal environment capable of sustaining the signal the field responds to. And yet the field is not static. It is a dynamic, living system that responds to the evolving patterns of coherence we sustain. Small adjustments in attention, subtle shifts in emotional tone, or brief moments of mindful presence can have disproportionate effects over time. The field magnifies coherence, it amplifies alignment, but it cannot be coerced or manipulated through superficial effort. This is the subtlety many overlook. Transformation is less about doing and more about being, embodying the state that naturally gives rise to possibility. In this context, patience is a form of power. The field operates in patterns that often exceed our perception of time. The visible outcome is preceded by subtle reorganization beneath the surface, neuronal, physiological, energetic. A coherent state must be sustained long enough for these micro-level adjustments to accumulate. Instant gratification is not the measure of alignment. Persistence in coherence is. Over time, sustained alignment changes perception, rewires behavior, and reorganizes the field itself. I have seen this principle manifest repeatedly in human experience. Individuals who consistently cultivate emotional coherence, even amidst uncertainty, begin to notice a pattern of synchronicity in their lives. Seemingly coincidental events align with intention. Relationships shift toward mutual resonance. Health improves in measurable ways. Opportunities emerge with a timing that feels orchestrated, yet it is not orchestrated by an external agent. It is the natural response of the field to sustained coherence. This understanding reshapes our relationship with effort. Effort without alignment is friction. It produces struggle, resistance, and fatigue. Effort within alignment, by contrast, feels effortless. Action flows from clarity rather than compulsion. The nervous system is regulated, attention is focused, and intuition guides behavior. In this state, manifestation is not a matter of chasing outcomes, but of participating in a responsive system where the internal and external co-create continuously. Another aspect that becomes apparent is the relational nature of coherence. Because the field connects all consciousness, our internal state affects more than our individual experience. Emotional coherence radiates outward. It influences interactions, relationships, and collective dynamics. Conversely, collective states of incoherence, stress, fear, confusion, create a denser environment that influences individual perception and behavior. In this way, personal practice is inherently social. By cultivating alignment within ourselves, we contribute to the broader coherence of the field and indirectly to the collective possibilities available to everyone. This insight reframes responsibility. Our thoughts, emotions, and physiological states are not private. They are energetic contributions to a larger system. Coherence becomes an act of stewardship. Every moment of presence, every conscious choice to align internally becomes a contribution to the field in which we live. The impact is subtle, cumulative, and sometimes imperceptible, yet over time, the field reorganizes in response to these repeated patterns. And because the field is responsive to quality rather than quantity, subtle shifts can yield profound results. A single moment of genuine gratitude can catalyze a cascade of alignment. A consciously sustained state of compassion can reorganize relational dynamics. The magnitude of effect is less about external magnitude and more about internal coherence. This principle is counterintuitive because we often equate change with visible effort or action. The field, however, amplifies coherence, not struggle. Ancient wisdom recognized this principle in symbolic terms: the heart as the center of intelligence, the breath as a bridge between mind and body, ritual as a method of aligning the individual with the cosmos. Modern science is now revealing the physiological mechanisms underlying these insights: heart-brain coherence, biophotonic emission, neuroplasticity. All of these demonstrate that our internal state has measurable effects on both perception and reality. The principles have remained consistent across time. Our tools for observing them are simply more precise now. I find it helpful to conceptualize this process as tuning an instrument. The body, mind, and emotion are strings. Coherence is the tuning. When tuned, even subtle vibrations resonate with the field, producing harmonics that extend beyond the individual. Out-of-tune states create dissonance that limits perception, diminishes creativity, and constrains possibilities. Tuning is not a one-time event, it is ongoing practice, requiring attention, presence, and intentionality. And yet, paradoxically, the act of tuning is effortless when it arises from alignment. Effort and surrender merge. Intention and openness coexist. The field does not require struggle, it requires participation. Coherence is both the method and the medium. Through repeated practice, what once felt effortful becomes natural. The state of alignment becomes a trait rather than a temporary condition, and the field responds accordingly. I have observed that as coherence becomes habitual, our perception of time itself shifts. Moments of clarity, insight, and connection appear to arrive spontaneously. Decisions emerge without hesitation. Opportunities are recognized instinctively. The boundaries between imagination and reality blur because the internal state consistently reflects the possibility we wish to inhabit. Manifestation, then, is not about forcing outcomes, but about embodying the state from which those outcomes naturally arise. And this brings us to the subtle but critical principle. The field responds not to desire alone, but to the congruence between thought, emotion, and embodied presence. Desire without coherence is noise. Coherence without clarity is misalignment. The true power of the divine field emerges when internal states are harmonized across all levels. When what we think, what we feel, and how we inhabit our bodies are aligned with the possibilities we intend to manifest. As we explore this principle further, it becomes increasingly clear that human potential is not limited by external circumstances, but by the degree to which we can cultivate sustained coherence. The field is responsive, intelligent, and participatory. It does not withhold, it does not judge, it mirrors the patterns we maintain. Every subtle adjustment, every intentional breath, every moment of emotional clarity becomes a step toward possibilities that were previously invisible or unattainable. And as I continue to observe and reflect, a deeper truth becomes undeniable. The divine field is not something separate from us. It is the medium through which consciousness expresses possibility, and our internal state is the primary interface. The question is no longer whether anything is possible, but whether we are willing and able to sustain the coherence required to fully participate in the infinite potential that exists within and around us.